Hello. Today we will tell you about a shocking situation that will drastically change the fate of our characters. All those who thought that Jackson's story would end with his decision were deeply mistaken. In fact, his life is just beginning to unravel into an unimaginable web of events. But before you get comfortable, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now sit back and relax, we're starting. Jackson Myers had been a builder for over a decade, spending his life amidst the constant hum of construction sites, steel beams, and the persistent sound of hammers and drills. He was respected among his colleagues, not just for his skill, but for his quiet leadership. His reputation was solid, built over the years on hard work and a keen eye for detail. But despite all of his success in the world of construction, one thing had always eluded him: a sense of peace at home. His wife, Elena, was a beautiful woman with a sharp mind and a kind heart. She had always been supportive, standing by Jackson through the ups and downs of his career. Their marriage had always felt solid, or so Jackson had thought, until recently. There was a distance between them, an unspoken tension that Jackson could never quite put his finger on. The nights when they used to talk about their dreams had turned into silent dinners, the spark in their relationship slowly dimming. The weight of this uncertainty hung over Jackson like a cloud, but he never voiced his concerns. He was too busy, focused on his work, trying to build a future. After all, he had always been taught that actions spoke louder than words, and if he worked hard enough, everything would fall into place. But lately, something felt wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. That feeling became a haunting reality one fateful day in late spring. The job site was buzzing with activity, as it often was. A major project was nearing completion, a towering skyscraper in the heart of New York City. Jackson, the foreman of the team, was overseeing the final stages of a significant structural reinforcement when the unthinkable happened. It started with a strange rumble deep beneath the ground, followed by a deafening crash that seemed to reverberate through the entire building. Jackson's heart skipped a beat as the construction site shook, the ground beneath his feet trembling. A section of the foundation had given way, and the entire structure seemed to shift and groan under the pressure. Concrete slabs and steel beams cascaded down, crushing everything in their path. Panic erupted among the workers, who scrambled to safety, but not everyone made it out in time. Jackson's mind snapped into overdrive. Years of experience kicked in, and his instincts told him to move quickly. Without a second thought, he sprinted towards the wreckage, his eyes scanning the chaos for anyone in need of help. His heart was pounding in his chest, but there was no time to feel fear. He was a leader, and he had a job to do. As he reached the epicenter of the collapse, the dust and smoke from the rubble made it nearly impossible to see. His breathing was labored, the air thick with debris, but he could hear the muffled cries of his colleagues. They were trapped beneath the fallen concrete, struggling to breathe, to stay alive. And then he saw him. Andre Coleman, his coworker and one of his closest friends on the site. Andre was pinned beneath a massive slab of concrete, blood seeping from his side. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with panic. Without hesitation, Jackson dropped to his knees beside Andre, ignoring the danger of the unstable structure around them. "Andre, hold on, I'm getting you out," he shouted, trying to reassure his friend even though his own heart was racing. The noise of the collapse still echoed around them, and Jackson knew that they didn't have much time. The building groaned ominously, and he could feel the air shift as more debris shifted overhead. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't leave Andre there to die. Jackson and a few other workers managed to gather enough strength to lift the massive concrete slab off Andre. It was slow, painstaking work, but finally, after what felt like an eternity, they succeeded. Andre was free. He gasped for air, his body shaking, his face twisted in pain. Jackson helped him sit up, looking at his friend with a mixture of relief and concern. "You're gonna be okay, Andre. Just stay with me, all right?" Jackson's voice was steady, but his mind was a storm of thoughts. He had saved Andre's life. He had risked his own to pull him from the wreckage. But there was no escaping the truth that lingered like a shadow in Jackson's mind. A few weeks earlier, Andre had done something that Jackson would never be able to forget. He had slept with Jackson's wife, Elena. Jackson had found out through a series of accidental discoveries. A misplaced text message on Elena's phone, a series of late-night phone calls. All of it pointed to a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical injury. The truth was unbearable. Jackson's world had fractured in that instant. He had confronted Elena, but there had been no shouting match, no accusations thrown. Instead, there had been silence, a quiet acceptance of the pain that had been inflicted. Elena had tried to explain, to justify her actions, but the damage had already been done. She had betrayed him, and it wasn't just with another man. It was with someone Jackson had trusted, someone he had considered a friend. And now, as he helped Andre to his feet and guided him to safety, the weight of the betrayal was almost too much to bear. "Thank you," Andre said, his voice weak but sincere. He looked up at Jackson, eyes filled with gratitude. But Jackson could see the tension in Andre's eyes, too. The same tension that had been building between them ever since the accident. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this than just a rescue. Andre had been in his life for years, had been a trusted colleague and friend. But now, after everything that had happened, Jackson wasn't sure where to place his feelings. Was Andre truly grateful for his rescue? Or was there something else at play, something deeper and darker that Jackson hadn't yet uncovered? And as Jackson walked away, knowing that Andre's life had been spared, the question that lingered in his mind was not just about his friend's survival. It was about his own. Could he continue to work alongside the man who had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible? Could he find it in himself to forgive? Or was this the beginning of a painful reckoning that would tear his world apart even further? The days following the accident felt like a blur to Jackson. The site continued to buzz with activity as they worked to clear the rubble and assess the damage, but Jackson found it hard to focus. His mind was constantly on Andre, and not just because he had saved his life. The thought of Elena, the affair, and the fragile state of their marriage weighed heavily on him, casting a dark shadow over everything he did. He found himself staring at his phone more often than he should, thinking about that fateful discovery. The text messages, the late-night calls, the lingering touches. Andre's betrayal had cut deep, but it wasn't just the physical act that hurt Jackson. It was the realization that his friend had not only betrayed him, but had stolen something far more precious: his trust. It wasn't just the man he had worked alongside for years. It was the man who had become a symbol of all the things Jackson had hoped to find in his life. But Jackson had to keep going. He couldn't let it consume him completely. Work was the only thing that could keep his mind from spiraling out of control, even though every time he saw Andre on the construction site, his pulse quickened. The past few days, they had barely spoken to one another outside of work-related conversations. It wasn't out of avoidance or anger. It was a quiet understanding, a recognition of what had happened and what could never be undone. The first time they spoke after the rescue was a few days later, when Jackson walked past Andre during lunch. Andre was sitting at a table, nursing a cup of coffee, looking exhausted but seemingly unscathed. His face bore the same look of gratitude, but there was an underlying tension, a sense of unease that Jackson couldn't ignore. "Hey," Jackson said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "How are you feeling?" Andre looked up, his eyes still a little glassy from the painkillers. "Better," he replied, his voice low. "Thanks again for saving me." Jackson nodded, though his heart wasn't in it. He couldn't bring himself to smile, couldn't pretend that everything was fine between them. He needed answers, not pleasantries. "Why didn't you tell me, Andre?" Jackson asked, his voice strained with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "Why didn't you say something? You knew I trusted you. You knew what it would do to me." Andre's face fell. He shifted in his seat, looking away for a moment as if trying to find the right words. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet. "I never meant for it to happen, Jackson. I never wanted to hurt you." Jackson's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had heard these words before, from Elena, from other people who had wronged him. "You never meant for it to happen? Is that supposed to make it okay?" His words were sharp, but there was a weariness in his voice, a deep, aching exhaustion that made him sound defeated rather than angry. "I was weak," Andre said, his voice cracking. "It was a mistake. It shouldn't have happened." Jackson exhaled slowly, trying to rein in his emotions. "And now you want me to forgive you? You want me to just forget about it?" "No," Andre said quickly, shaking his head. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know what to do, Jackson. I don't want this to ruin our friendship." Jackson looked at him for a long moment, weighing the words carefully. Friendship. That word seemed so hollow now, tainted by the betrayal that hung between them like a thick fog. "Friendship?" Jackson repeated, almost bitterly. "You're the one who ruined that, Andre, not me. Don't talk to me about friendship." Andre's gaze dropped to the table, his face filled with shame. "I know I don't deserve anything from you. I get it. But I swear to you, I never meant for any of this to happen. It was a mistake, and I regret it every day." The words hung in the air, but Jackson couldn't bring himself to respond. He felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Andre's apologies meant little in the face of what had been lost. Jackson had given so much, not just his trust, but his loyalty, his friendship. And now, everything had been ripped away. As Jackson turned to walk away, he felt a pang of sadness. Not for Andre, but for himself. He had never thought this would be his life. Never thought he would find himself standing here, torn between his loyalty to a man who had betrayed him and the love for a woman who had broken his heart. At home that night, Elena was waiting for him. She hadn't called or texted him all day, and when Jackson stepped through the door, she looked up at him, her expression unreadable. It had been like this for weeks now. Silence between them, an uncomfortable distance that neither of them knew how to cross. "You're late," Elena said softly, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. Jackson didn't answer right away, his mind still reeling from the conversation with Andre. He had expected confrontation, but instead, he found himself struggling to maintain the facade of a normal evening. "I had to stay late at the site," Jackson muttered, avoiding her gaze. The lie felt bitter on his tongue, but he didn't know what else to say. The truth would only break whatever was left of their fragile relationship. "I was thinking about us today," Elena said quietly. "About everything that's happened. Jackson, I'm so sorry." The apology didn't feel like enough. It never did. "I don't want your apologies, Elena," Jackson said, his voice low but firm. "You don't get to apologize and then pretend like everything is fine." She flinched at his words, her eyes welling up with tears. "Jackson, please. I know I hurt you. I can't take it back, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us." He met her gaze for a brief moment before looking away. "You can't fix this. You broke something that can't be repaired." The words were harsh, but they felt true. There was nothing left between them but the remnants of a life that had once been filled with love and trust. And now, all that was left was pain, a chasm that would only widen with time. That night, Jackson didn't sleep. He lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Elena's quiet sobs from the other room. He could hear her, but he couldn't bring himself to go to her. Every part of him wanted to hold her and pretend that everything would be okay. But it was all too far gone. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. And as Jackson lay there in the dark, he realized that the past few weeks had irrevocably changed him. He wasn't sure who he was anymore, but he knew one thing. Everything would be different now, and there was no going back. Jackson woke up to the familiar sounds of the city, the faint hum of traffic outside his apartment blending with the sounds of morning routines. He blinked at the ceiling, his mind slowly clearing from a restless sleep. It had been a long night of tossing and turning, filled with flashes of the conversations with Andre, Elena, and his own spiraling thoughts. Nothing had resolved itself in his mind. The problems that had seemed so clear when he'd gone to bed were only more muddled in the light of day. It had been days since his confrontation with Elena, yet their home felt emptier with each passing hour. She had tried to speak to him, tried to apologize, but the words seemed meaningless. Jackson had heard the same words over and over again. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to happen." But they no longer held any weight. What mattered now was not the apology, but the unspoken truth. Elena had betrayed him. And it wasn't just about Andre. It was the fact that Jackson had put his trust in her, and she had broken it. He had never been this type to confront his problems head-on. He preferred to work through things, bury his feelings beneath the weight of daily life. But the situation with Elena and Andre had forced him to confront not just their betrayal, but his own fears. Of losing his family, of failing in the one thing he had tried to build his entire life on: trust. That morning, he decided he couldn't avoid it any longer. He had to see Elena, not just for her sake, but for his. He needed to face the woman he had loved and now didn't recognize. The woman who had broken his heart, betrayed him with his closest friend. Andre, too, had to be confronted, but that was a conversation that Jackson wasn't ready for yet. Today, it was Elena. He found her in the kitchen, her back turned as she stood over the counter, brewing coffee. The soft scent of freshly ground beans filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension that gripped the room. She didn't hear him approach, and for a moment he stood there watching her. She looked the same as always, beautiful, with her long hair falling loosely around her shoulders, her eyes tired but hopeful. "Elena," Jackson said, his voice steady but distant. She stiffened at the sound of his voice, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She didn't turn around right away. Instead, she focused on the coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she poured it into 2 mugs. Jackson, Elena finally whispered, her voice breaking the silence between them. We need to talk. Jackson nodded, though he wasn't sure if talking would change anything. It had been so easy before, when everything between them had felt simple, when love had been something they both shared. But now it felt like a war of words, a war of emotions, a war of betrayal. And there was no clear victor, only casualties. Yeah, we do, he said, his voice colder than he intended. She set the mugs on the table, then slowly turned to face him. Her eyes were red, swollen from days of crying, and her face was drawn with the weight of guilt. But Jackson wasn't sure if he cared about the tears anymore. His heart had hardened against her. Not because he hated her, but because he no longer knew who she was. Jackson, she began, her voice trembling. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can. But I need you to understand something. What happened between me and Andre? It was a mistake. It was a horrible mistake, and I regret it every day. The words seemed rehearsed, like something she had practiced over and over in her mind, hoping that if she said them enough, they would make a difference. But to Jackson, they were just empty words. Words didn't erase the betrayal. Words didn't erase the image of Andre's face, knowing what had happened between them. I understand, Jackson replied flatly, his eyes narrowing. You regret it, but I can't just forget it. I can't just pretend it didn't happen. Elena looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. I know, she whispered. I don't expect you to forget, but I need you to believe me. I was lost. I've been lost for so long, and when Andre came into my life, I wasn't thinking. It was selfish, and it wasn't right. Jackson took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. He couldn't let her see how much this was tearing him apart. So what, Elena? He asked, his voice a mix of anger and hurt. You're telling me you slept with him because you were lost? Because you didn't think about what it would do to me? I didn't think, Jackson, she said, shaking her head, her voice barely a whisper. I wasn't thinking about you, or our marriage, or what this would do to our lives. It was just something that happened, and I couldn't stop it. And I've hated myself every single day since. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Jackson's mind was spinning, but there was something deep inside him that told him this conversation wasn't over. He couldn't just accept her apologies, not after everything that had happened, not after the way she had betrayed him. But he couldn't walk away from this either. He had to know if there was anything left of the love they had shared, anything that could be salvaged. What do you want from me, Elena? Jackson finally asked, his voice breaking the silence. What do you want me to do with this? With you? She shook her head again, tears streaming down her face. I don't want you to forgive me. Not now, not yet. I just want you to understand that I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted this. I love you, Jackson. I love you more than anything. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. But I can't fix what I've broken. I know that. Jackson swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He loved her too. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, he still loved her. But love wasn't enough to heal the wounds that had been opened. Trust, once broken, was a fragile thing, and Jackson wasn't sure he could ever trust her again, not after everything that had happened. I don't know what to do, Elena, he said quietly, the pain in his voice evident. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this, but I'm not ready to walk away either. Not yet. Elena reached out for him, but Jackson stepped back, unable to let her touch him. He wasn't sure what he was feeling anymore. Anger, sadness, confusion, love, it all tangled together, making it hard to breathe. I need time, he said, his voice cold, but not without a hint of regret. I need time to figure this out. I can't make any decisions right now. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll give you all the time you need, she whispered. Jackson walked away, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Not with Elena, not with Andre, and not with himself. The man he had been, the man who had trusted and loved with all his heart, was gone. And in his place was a man who was broken, uncertain, and unsure of where to go from here. The days that followed were some of the longest in Jackson's life. He found himself constantly caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. He had never been good at dealing with feelings of betrayal, hurt, and anger. His natural inclination had always been to bury those feelings beneath the weight of work, to focus on tasks and projects, as if that could solve everything. But now, with Elena's betrayal hanging over him like a dark cloud, he couldn't escape. Work no longer held the same comfort. It only reminded him of how broken his world had become. Each time he saw Elena, she seemed like a stranger. Her eyes, once warm and full of love, now reflected nothing but guilt and remorse. She would try to approach him, to talk, to touch him, but Jackson always recoiled. Every gesture from her felt like a reminder of the pain she had caused. And yet, a small part of him still wanted to believe that things could go back to normal, that somehow they could rebuild. But another part of him knew that would never happen. Trust, once broken, couldn't be fixed. Not easily, anyway. Not without time, and maybe not even then. Jackson had always been a practical man, one who tried to keep his emotions in check. But now, faced with the reality of his shattered marriage and his friendship with Andre in ruins, his calm facade was slipping. His thoughts turned dark, filled with resentment. He had been betrayed by both people he had cared about deeply, and the weight of that betrayal felt suffocating. It was one evening, just a week after his conversation with Elena, that Jackson found himself standing in front of Andre's apartment. He hadn't spoken to his old friend since the accident, and the guilt that he had saved Andre's life without confronting him about the affair was gnawing at him. He had avoided Andre for days, too angry and too conflicted to deal with him. But now, standing in front of the building, Jackson knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. The confrontation with Elena hadn't given him the answers he needed. It had only raised more questions, and now he had to hear it from Andre. He rang the doorbell, his heart beating faster than it should have. When Andre answered, there was no warmth in his expression, just a quiet recognition of what was to come. "Jackson," Andre said, his voice devoid of surprise. "I knew you'd come eventually." Jackson stepped into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. The space was minimalistic, cold, almost clinical. Andre had never been the type to indulge in luxury, but his home always seemed to reflect his detached nature. It was almost as if he kept everything at a distance, including himself. "Do you ever feel guilty, Andre?" Jackson asked, his voice rough, filled with barely controlled rage. Andre closed the door behind them but didn't answer right away. "Of course I feel guilty," Andre said, finally meeting Jackson's eyes. "I'm not a monster. I know what I did was wrong." Jackson clenched his fists at his sides, fighting the urge to lash out. "But you did it anyway. You went behind my back. You hurt me, Andre. You hurt me in a way I can't forget." Andre nodded, but there was no defense in his posture. He looked down, as if trying to gather his thoughts, but Jackson could see the guilt on his face. For a moment, Jackson felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing that Andre was suffering too. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. "I didn't think it would go that far," Andre said quietly. "I didn't think about what it would do to you. But it did. And I'm sorry. Truly I am." Jackson took a step forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "You're sorry? That's it? That's all you have to say for yourself?" Andre sighed, his face pinched with regret. "I don't know what you want from me, Jackson. I can't take it back. I can't undo what I did. All I can do is apologize and try to make it right. But I can't erase the past. I can't fix what's broken." Jackson's chest tightened. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about an apology. You betrayed me in the worst way possible. You slept with my wife, Andre. My wife. I trusted you. I called you my friend. And you threw it all away for what? For a few moments of pleasure? Was it worth it?" Andre didn't flinch. He just stood there, his shoulders sagging as if under the weight of the conversation. "It wasn't about pleasure. Not really. It was about something else. Something I didn't even understand at the time. I was confused, Jackson. I was lost and I didn't know what to do. But I understand now, and I'll live with the guilt for the rest of my life." Jackson took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He knew this conversation wasn't going to bring any closure. It wasn't going to fix anything. He couldn't forgive Andre yet. Maybe he never would, but he needed to say it. He needed to tell him how much he had hurt him, how much the betrayal had torn him apart. "You think saying you're sorry is enough?" Jackson's voice was steady, but the anger inside him was still simmering. "You think I'm going to be okay with this? That I can just forget that you destroyed everything I cared about?" Andre stepped back, visibly shaken. "No, Jackson. I don't think that. But I can't change what happened. I can't go back and undo it. All I can do now is try to make things right, even if that means staying away from you." Jackson looked at his former friend, his heart heavy with a mix of anger and sorrow. Andre was right about one thing. He couldn't change the past. Neither of them could. But Jackson couldn't let it go. Not yet. Not when the pain was still so fresh, so raw. "You've already ruined it," Jackson said quietly, his voice hoarse. "And I don't think I can ever look at you the same way again." Andre didn't respond. He didn't need to. The finality in Jackson's words was enough to make him understand that their friendship was over. Jackson turned and walked toward the door. He didn't look back. He didn't want to. But as he stepped out into the hallway, he felt something shift inside him. Something that had been broken was beginning to heal, just a little. He still didn't know what he was going to do about Elena. He didn't know if he could ever forgive her. But at least one chapter of this painful story had come to an end, and that at least gave him some hope. Jackson didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. His mind kept racing through the conversation with Andre, replaying the harsh words, the emotions that had been on the edge of his control. It was as if the weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal by his wife, the loss of his closest friend, the pain of his own confusion, had finally hit him all at once. It was suffocating, and no amount of rest or time would make it go away. Andre had apologized. But what did that really mean? How could a simple apology ever heal the wounds that had been inflicted on him? Jackson didn't know if he could ever look at Andre the same way again. He didn't know if he could ever trust him. There was something about that betrayal that ran deeper than simple hurt. It felt like a fracture in the very foundation of who he was, and he didn't know how to fix it. The following days dragged on in a haze. Jackson tried to focus on his work, but it wasn't enough to distract him. Every time he stepped into the office or onto the construction site, his mind wandered back to Elena. He couldn't escape the fact that she was still in his life, still in the same house, still a constant presence in his world. And yet, she wasn't the woman he had once known. She was a stranger, a person he had loved, but now saw through a veil of betrayal and regret. Despite everything, he hadn't left. He hadn't packed up and walked out the door, as he had imagined countless times. And that was the problem. He couldn't leave, but he couldn't stay either. He was stuck in limbo, torn between the life he had built and the truth that now lay in pieces around him. One afternoon, after another restless night, Jackson came home early. It was a rare moment of freedom, a break from the constant chaos of his life. The apartment was quiet when he walked in, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Elena wasn't home. Jackson didn't know whether he should feel relieved or more anxious. It had been a few days since their last conversation, and they had hardly spoken since then. It felt as though they were both walking on eggshells, unsure of how to proceed. He walked into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and sat down at the table. The apartment felt emptier now, quieter. The space that had once been filled with their laughter, their shared moments, now felt hollow. Jackson stared at the walls, the weight of the silence pressing in on him. And then, he heard the door. Elena had returned. He didn't turn around, didn't make a move. He could feel her presence before she spoke. "Jackson," she said softly, almost hesitantly. He could tell that she was waiting for him to acknowledge her, but he didn't. He couldn't. "You didn't answer my calls," she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk." Jackson didn't look up. "What's there left to say, Elena?" She paused for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. "Jackson, please. I know I messed up. I know I've hurt you, but I need you to listen. I need you to understand." "Understand what?" Jackson finally asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "That you slept with my best friend? That you've broken everything we had? What is there to understand?" Elena took a step closer, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I never wanted this to happen. It was a moment of weakness, a mistake, and I regret it more than you'll ever know. But I love you, Jackson. I love you so much, and I don't want to lose you." Jackson looked up at her then, his eyes cold, his expression unreadable. He could see the tears in her eyes, but they no longer moved him. How could they? She had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and now, here she was, asking for his forgiveness. But Jackson couldn't forgive her. Not yet, and maybe not ever. "You think love is enough, Elena?" he asked quietly. "You think love can fix this? After everything?" After you slept with Andre, my friend, and lied to me, you think love is enough? She shook her head, her face contorted with guilt. No, I don't think love can fix it. But I'm asking for a chance to make it right. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try. Please, Jackson, please give me that chance. Jackson stood up, walking toward the window and staring out at the city below. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, but it wasn't the face he recognized. It was the face of a man who had been broken, shattered by those he had trusted most. He had always prided himself on being strong, on being in control, but now he felt helpless, powerless in the face of his own life falling apart. I don't know if I can give you that chance, Elena, Jackson said quietly. I don't know if I can look at you and forget what you did, what Andre did. She stepped closer, reaching out for him. Jackson, please. I'll do anything. I just need you to believe in us again. Jackson turned away from the window, looking at her for the first time in days. Her face was a mixture of desperation and love, but Jackson couldn't bring himself to feel the same way. He didn't know who she was anymore, and he didn't know who he was either. You've already done too much, Elena, Jackson said, his voice hoarse. I can't do this anymore. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything is okay. I can't pretend that nothing has changed, because everything has changed. She looked at him, her face crumpling as if she had just been struck. The tears fell freely now, but Jackson didn't move. He couldn't. I don't know what to do, Jackson continued, his voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this, how to fix us, but I know that I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that I'm fine when I'm not. Elena stood there, trembling, as Jackson walked past her, out of the room. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The pain was too much to bear. He needed space, needed time to think, to figure out what was left of him, and what was worth saving. As he walked into the hallway, Jackson knew that something was ending. Something had already ended, and there was no going back. His marriage, his friendship, his entire life, they had all been reduced to rubble. And now, he was left to sift through the ashes, wondering what, if anything, could be salvaged. The days after his conversation with Elena dragged on. Jackson had withdrawn into himself, spending more and more time away from the apartment. His colleagues at the construction site noticed his distant demeanor, his lack of focus, but no one said anything. Jackson had always been a quiet man, but now it felt as though the silence was swallowing him whole. He couldn't escape the truth that had sunk deep within him. His world, the life he had built, was gone. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He couldn't bring himself to walk out the door, not just yet. Maybe it was the years of shared memories with Elena. Maybe it was the thought of what they had once had, before everything had collapsed. Or maybe it was simply fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of being alone. But whatever it was, Jackson remained in the apartment, moving through his days like a ghost. Every time he saw Elena, he felt the weight of her presence, the constant reminder of the betrayal. She, too, had become a shadow of her former self. The once vibrant woman who had always been so full of life now seemed subdued, her movements slow, her words hesitant. She was still trying to fix things, trying to prove that she could make it right. But Jackson wasn't sure that it was enough. How could it be? How could anything ever be enough after what had happened? One evening, as the sun set and cast a soft orange glow over the city, Jackson stood at the window, looking out at the skyline. His thoughts were a jumble, a swirl of anger, hurt, and confusion. Elena had tried to reach out to him again, to apologize once more, but each time it felt like the same empty words. Her apologies had become a broken record, playing over and over again, but they no longer had any meaning. Jackson didn't know what he was waiting for. A sign, an answer, something that would show him the way forward. He had already faced the truth about Elena, about Andre. He had confronted them both, and yet, he still felt no closer to finding peace. The door behind him creaked open, and he turned to see Elena standing there. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him, her eyes full of sadness and regret. She had been quiet lately, giving him space, but Jackson knew that the silence between them was becoming unbearable. It was as if they were both afraid to speak, afraid of what the other might say. "Elena," Jackson said softly, his voice almost a whisper. She stepped closer, but there was no urgency in her movements. It was as if she, too, knew that their time together was running out. You don't have to say anything, Elena said, her voice strained. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I will always be sorry for what I did to you, for what I did to us. Jackson closed his eyes for a moment, the words echoing in his mind. But he had already heard them too many times. It wasn't the apology that he needed anymore. It wasn't the words that could fix anything. What he needed was a way out of the pain. What he needed was a decision. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, and saw the woman she had become. She was no longer the woman he had married, no longer the person he had trusted with everything. The betrayal had changed her, and it had changed him. They were two people lost in the rubble of a life they had once shared. I can't do this anymore, Elena, Jackson said, his voice heavy with finality. The words felt like they were tearing him apart, but they were the truth. He couldn't keep pretending that they could fix it. He couldn't keep pretending that things would ever be the same. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know, but I will always love you, and I will always regret what I did. You were everything to me, Jackson. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in on them, trapping them in this moment of goodbye. Jackson's heart ached, but there was no turning back now. They had both made mistakes, and now they had to live with the consequences. I'm sorry, Elena, he said quietly, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. I'm sorry too, but I can't stay. Not like this. Elena nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. I understand. I don't deserve you. I never did. Jackson stepped forward and placed his hand on her shoulder. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and in that silence, there was an understanding, an unspoken recognition of everything they had been through and everything they had lost. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he knew he couldn't, not anymore. I need to leave, Jackson said, his voice almost a whisper. I need to find a way to move on, to heal. She nodded again, her body trembling. I'll always love you, Jackson. I hope one day you'll find happiness again. Jackson turned and walked toward the door, but before he left, he paused. He glanced back at her one last time, his heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. But it was over. There was nothing left to say. He stepped out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him. And as he walked away from the apartment, from Elena, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't peace. It was emptiness, a hollow space where his love for her had once been. But there was something else there too, a flicker of hope. The beginning of a new chapter, one that he would have to write on his own. He didn't know where it would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of control. He had made the choice. He had chosen to walk away, to take back his life. As he stepped into the elevator, his reflection caught in the mirror. The man staring back at him was a stranger, but he was also the man who had survived. He had faced the hardest thing he had ever had to face, and now he was ready to rebuild. Not just his life, but himself. The elevator doors closed, and as it descended, Jackson's mind was no longer filled with the noise of the past. It was quiet, and for the first time in a long time it felt like freedom.